Big reversal in a $7.2 million fraud case in Hennepin County. The judge has thrown out the jury's guilty verdict. This is a case Lou Raguse has been following since the beginning. The judge's actions could make it harder to prosecute state fraud cases in the future.
So we have been inundated with story after story of fraud coming out of the state of Minnesota, specifically as it relates to taxpayer dollars, and a huge portion of this fraud is coming from the burgeoning Somali community in that particular state. And we have seen scheme after scheme be uncovered, and we've talked about it on this channel, and these scams are so common in the state of Minnesota that one of the funniest things that we ended up discovering while watching one of these local news segments is that the local news media actually has uncovered specific office buildings that are the setup location for multiple of these different schemes, even after the previous one was busted up by the feds.
Secretary of State filings confirmed a business address, which brought us to this building in Roseville.
All right, so we're looking for a place called Action Therapy. But here's the thing, I'm having a sense of deja vu. I've already been to this address and this exact suite number months ago when we were looking at a housing stabilization company called Liberty Plus.
Now, here we are, going back to the same address and suite, looking for Action Therapy, accused by a client of billing for services not provided.
Suite 400, Action Therapy. Liberty Plus, the housing stabilization place that was raided, is also listed here.
But what we're going to talk about today is a specific Medicaid billing scheme, one that cost the taxpayers $7.2 million, and what was described as, by the jurors, the easiest conviction that you could possibly imagine when they discovered that the person behind this scheme didn't even have an office building, let alone render the services that he claimed he was rendering, and actually ran his whole operation out of one single mailbox over the course of years, and again took $7.2 million from the taxpayer, and yet somehow one judge has decided that Somalis are innocent Baba Angel Aladdins, and she has overturned this conviction. So what we're going to do throughout the course of this video is talk about how guilty these people actually are, how insane this decision actually is, and the broader implications of having these woke left-wing judges just overturn it based on very little evidence because they feel like it. And honestly, aren't the Somalis entitled to loot our country as guests in our nation, as supposed refugees? So this is what we're going to talk about. This is what we're going to discuss. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money, okay?
Lou?
Julie, it's extremely rare for a judge to reverse a jury's verdict in a criminal case. Jurors I spoke to today told me it was not a difficult decision to find Abdi Fattah Yusuf guilty in a Medicaid billing scheme, and they're surprised by this development.
At the August trial for Abdi Fattah Yusuf, the jury heard evidence that he ran his home health care company Promise Health out of a mailbox at a Central Avenue address where multiple other home health care companies were supposedly located. Yusuf and his wife, Lol Ahmed, were charged with stealing $7.2 million of taxpayer money through Medicaid overbilling in a personal care assistant, or PCA, scam. The couple allegedly spent tens of thousands of the fraud money on luxury items for themselves.
So the local news segment highlights the fact that they were spending money on luxury goods, they were running the business out of a mailbox, and all these other things that indicate guilt of the person that was convicted in this particular case. But if you can believe it, they are actually dramatically underselling the obvious guilt of these individuals. So what we have to do is go to some articles that break down the case from at the time of conviction, what was actually proven in court, for you to see it for yourselves, because you will be blown away by the fact that one judge decided to override a jury of the peers of this particular individual when the evidence was so overwhelming. Again, from August 12th, 2025, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, who by the way is a left-wing prosecutor, announced today that his office's Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, MFCU, obtained guilty verdicts at the criminal trial of Abdi Fattah Yusuf in Hennepin County. A jury found Yusuf guilty of 6 counts of aiding and abetting the theft by swindle of over $35,000. The jury also found multiple aggravating factors existed to support an upward departure from Minnesota sentencing guidelines. Yusuf will be sentenced before the Honorable Sarah S. West at a later date to be set by the court. So they were able to prove in court that Abdi Fattah Yusuf stole north of $35,000 6 different times for a total, by the way, of $7.2 million during the trial, and there were multiple aggravating factors behind this in order to get sentence enhancements, because that is how guilty he was, that not even Keith Ellison, a woke left-wing attorney general, one of the worst in the country, could actually ignore it. But it actually gets significantly worse, because this case was backed up by financial records and all sorts of other things that are clearly and obviously indicative of guilt. However, this woke left-wing judge that we're going to get into in just a little bit thought anything but guilt was appropriate for these innocent Baba Angel Somalis. In June of 2024, Attorney General Ellison's MFCU charged Yusuf with bilking Minnesota Medical Assistance, their Medicaid program, through his agency, Promise Health Services, LLC. Promise claimed to provide home and community-based waivered services, but it lacked any office building and operated for years out of a mailbox. Yusuf and his family members fraudulently obtained Medicaid funds by billing for services not provided, services that were billed based on false documentation, services that were overbilled, services that were billed but lacked any documentation to support the services, and kickbacks provided to recipients to induce them to receive quote-unquote services from the agent. So this is basically fraud on every possible level. They were billing for services that didn't exist. They didn't even have an office, much less the staff appropriate in order to provide these services. They were giving kickbacks to people that they were using their identities in order to bill services to, in order to make sure they kept their mouth shut. And again, they did this for years while operating the entirety of this at-home healthcare business out of one single mailbox. But the numbers and the paper trail associated with this are astronomical and insane. While Yusuf operated Promise, the agency stole over $7 million. MFCU investigators determined that Yusuf frequently used the money stolen from the Medicaid program to fund a lavish lifestyle for himself and his family, including directing over $1 million from the Promise business account into Yusuf's personal account, withdrawing over $387,000 of that in cash. Yusuf and his wife also spent more than $22,000 at furniture stores, despite Promise lacking any physical office space, spent over $42,000 at luxury automotive dealers, and over $80,000 at luxury clothes stores, including Coach, Canada Goose, Michael Kors, Third Degree Heat, Nike, and Nordstrom. So look, I'm assuming not many of you are business owners out there in the audience, but let me let you in on a little bit of a secret. If you take money from your business account when it's an LLC and then transfer it directly into your personal account, and it is not done up properly as compensation that you do taxes on and whatnot, you're not W-2'd properly or W-9 properly in that situation, that is a crime on its own. But this guy not only did that, but on paper, he spent a huge portion of the money on luxury goods and whatnot, but then he withdrew nearly $400,000 in cash, again, of money fraudulently obtained for services that were not provided, and he also spent that on God knows what, possibly more bribes to providers, possibly more luxury goods that have yet to be determined. But needless to say, this account activity was so obviously suspicious and ridiculous and unjustifiable that, of course, a jury convicted this guy in no time at all. They were saying it was one of the easiest convictions humanly possible. However, like I said, one judge decided to overturn this conviction, so let us hear from her explanation on why she did what, again, is a rare move for a judge to actually engage in, which is override the will of the jury in order to let this guy go.
Despite the jury swiftly convicting Yusuf, Judge Sarah West last week decided they got it wrong.
It's reversing or overturning a jury's verdict.
Defense attorney Joe Tamburino, who's not affiliated with this case, reviewed the decision and analyzed it for KARE 11 News. He says Judge West ruled that the state's case relied heavily on circumstantial evidence.
Honestly, guys, I don't even know how this person is a judge. Maybe her law degree is given to her based on some fraudulent Somali operation, because the fact that a judge said that this case was based on circumstantial evidence, therefore something, they're probably not guilty, is patently absurd and ridiculous. Let me explain something to you guys out there in the audience, because you might get your legal education from shows like Law and Order or like CSI or whatever, but the overwhelming majority of evidence is circumstantial evidence. There's two different categories. There is direct and circumstantial. Direct is an eyewitness, somebody who is testifying against you. Basically, that is it. Or confession from the person who participated in the actual crime. Everything else is circumstantial evidence. All forensic evidence, including DNA, paperwork, all that stuff, the paper trail in this particular case, that is all technically circumstantial evidence. So what the judge is saying right here is that since they couldn't flip somebody to turn on this guy, and this guy didn't confess to the fraud, this is all circumstantial evidence, which, by the way, means hard evidence, means data, means bank records, means everything you should need to convict, because make no mistake about it, you can and many people do get convicted just on circumstantial evidence, because that is all physical evidence, all record evidence. And she's like, no big deal. I don't think you guys really needed to go in that direction with the detailed banking information and whatnot. And then she follows it up by saying that the prosecution should have found other theories that were alternatives to guilt.
And that she believed the state did not rule out other reasonable inferences.
That, in fact, there could have been other reasonable theories other than guilt in this case.
Okay, so everybody needs to also understand that ignorance of the law is not an excuse for breaking the law. So if one of the alternatives to guilt is that these Somalis just didn't know that you weren't supposed to take $1 million in fraudulently obtained funds, transfer it to your personal account, then withdraw $400,000 of that in cash, spend it on God knows what. And then, of course, in addition to that, you weren't supposed to buy luxury goods with, again, money that was supposed to be going to the services that you definitely weren't providing. That is not an excuse. So I don't know what the hell this judge is on about alternative theories to guilt. Maybe they were just scammed into making themselves multi-millionaires off the taxpayer dole. But I honestly don't know what the she's talking about. This woman has absolutely lost her mind, and we really need to reassess what is going on with these judges.
That's what it comes down to.
Despite the ruling, even Judge West wrote that she is troubled by the manner in which fraud was able to be perpetuated at Promise Health.
And then this judge closes by saying that she's concerned about the level of fraud that is going on in the state of Minnesota when it comes to their Medicaid program. Well, one of the things that I do when I'm concerned about the level of fraud that is going on in a certain situation is not use my power to then release the fraudster. Like, that would be the first step, probably, in my humblest of humble opinions, to addressing the problem. Because what this judge ultimately ended up doing is creating a scenario where people can appeal their fraud convictions despite overwhelming evidence of guilt, with the expectation that this dumbass judge will be like, well, you know, I don't really know if they really explored all evidence of innocence. Why didn't the prosecution at trial try to prove that this Somali didn't do anything wrong? It's almost as if they're not the defense attorney. It's almost as if the evidence was overwhelming and they pursued the case as they should. But that's just confusing to this dumbass judge who thinks that maybe there's alternative theories, but also she is very much concerned with the level of Medicaid fraud. She acknowledges that the $7.1 million is stolen. It also ended up in the account of this guy right here who is running a fraudulent company. But, you know, it's very concerning to her that the prosecution didn't decide maybe that they might be innocent Baba Angel Aladdins just trying to feed their starving family $80,000 worth of luxury goods.
I was stunned.
State Representative Kristen Robbins, chair of the House Fraud Prevention and State Oversight Committee, says she's now reviewing if any state laws need to be tightened.
We want to strengthen state law so that we can get prosecutions out of these cases, because clearly a jury thought he was guilty.
So you have a state representative saying that they're going to tighten their laws in case there is a gap that is being exploited by this decision. Honestly, you just got to get rid of that judge, impeach her, and deport her back to Somalia with the people that she wants to aid and abet in that kleptocracy over there. But then we're going to hear from the jury foreperson because this man knows that they're guilty 100% and he's absolutely shocked.
Jurors in the case can't believe the decision.
I am shocked. I'm shocked based off of all of the evidence that was presented to us and the obvious guilt that we saw based off of the said evidence. It was not a difficult decision whatsoever. The deliberation took probably 4 hours at most. Based off of the state's evidence that was presented, I was beyond a reasonable doubt.
Now look, 4 hours is not a long time in terms of a jury for deliberation, especially when you have this many counts and this many pieces of evidence to review. They basically did this as fast as humanly possible because the guy was guilty, but of course the attorney for the accused, who now has had his conviction overturned, has said, oh, well, our guy totally innocent, and this just proves that.
Attorney for Mr. Yusuf, Ian Burrell, sent me a statement today that says, in part, Judge West's ruling affirms what we have maintained from the beginning, that our client, Mr. Yusuf, was wrongfully accused and did not commit fraud or racketeering.
Look, on this channel, we don't go after defense attorneys for doing their work as defense attorneys. Everybody is entitled to a legitimate defense. And obviously, whatever they did on appeal worked somehow. I don't even know how it's even possible, but whatever. That's where we are in terms of this case. Apparently, the AG's office is going to try to appeal this. Hopefully, they are successful because, yeah, it seems like this case is a slam dunk, but apparently the Somalis are just above the law. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about madness in the state of Minnesota. Till next time.